They told her the baby didn't survive the night. She buried an empty coffin. 16 years later, Gloria Martell walked into a charity event and saw her ex-husband, the billionaire, who'd abandoned her in labor, holding the hand of a teenage girl with Gloria's face. Her daughter, alive, raised by the man who stole her. And the person who orchestrated it all? Someone who profited billions, while Gloria mourned a child who was never dead. Gloria Martell's hands were steady as she arranged donor plaques on the community center wall. 16 years of teaching art to kids who needed beauty in their lives had taught her how to hold herself together, how to smile through the ache, how to live with a hole in her chest that never quite closed. She'd learned to survive the anniversary dates, the birth date she couldn't celebrate, the due date that came and went like clockwork every November, always arriving with that familiar tightness in her throat and the phantom ache of empty arms that had never held what they were meant to hold. The past was a room she had locked, the key thrown into a river she'd never visit again. She'd survived by sealing it away, the hospital room, the doctor's whispered words, the moment her entire world collapsed into 6 syllables. I'm sorry, she didn't make it. Until today. Until the moment everything she'd buried came clawing back to life. Now pay attention to what happens next, because the universe was about to prove that some graves don't stay closed. The Spring Gala was the biggest fundraiser of the year. Local businesses, corporate sponsors, the kind of people who wrote checks with more zeros than Gloria would see in a decade. She was only there to thank the donors who'd funded the new ceramic studio. Shake hands, smile, slip out before champagne toasts turned into networking sessions that made her skin crawl. She was adjusting a banner near the entrance when the room shifted. Not the room, the energy, like pressure dropping before a storm. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones appeared in hands like conjured objects. Security guards materialized at doorways, speaking into earpieces with that particular intensity that meant someone important had arrived. Someone near the entrance whispered a name that made Gloria's blood turn to ice water in her veins. David Miller. Her ex-husband. The billionaire CEO who'd built an empire while she'd rebuilt a life from ash and grief. The man who'd left her bleeding and alone in a hospital bed 16 years ago while she delivered their child. The man she hadn't seen since she signed divorce papers with hands that shook so badly the lawyer had to steady the pen. She told herself it didn't matter anymore. 16 years was long enough to bury any feeling. She was wrong. Gloria turned toward the entrance, already planning her exit, when she saw something that stopped her heart mid-beat. Not David, though he was there, older, sharper, wearing power like a second skin. The girl beside him. 16. Maybe 17. Long dark curls that caught the overhead lights, like black silk. A navy dress that made her look older than she was. Skin the exact shade Gloria saw in her mirror every morning. And when the girl turned to say something to David, when she smiled, Gloria's knees buckled. Remember this moment. Remember those dimples, because what Gloria's about to discover will change everything. Those dimples, identical to Gloria's, cut into cheeks, like someone had taken Gloria's DNA and sculpted it 16 years younger. Those gray-blue eyes that shifted like storm clouds depending on the light. Eyes Gloria had only seen in one other face, her own. That exact tilt of the head slightly to the left when thinking, like a bird listening for predators. Gloria grabbed the edge of a display table. Her fingers dug into wood hard enough to splinter. Around her, donors chatted about quarterly earnings and tax write-offs, oblivious to the woman whose entire reality was disintegrating. Because she wasn't seeing a stranger, she was seeing a ghost. Her ghost. The girl laughed, a sound bright and unguarded, and something inside Gloria shattered all over again. This wasn't possible. The baby had died. The doctor had told her. She'd held a death certificate in her trembling hands. She'd buried an empty casket because the hospital said it would help with closure. But that girl had Gloria's mouth, Gloria's gestures, Gloria's soul looking out through 16-year-old eyes. Can you imagine? Can you imagine seeing your dead child alive? David stood beside the girl, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He looked older, gray, threading his temples, lines carved around eyes that had seen too many boardrooms and not enough sunlight. The kind of man who'd spent 16 years building an empire, while Gloria had spent 16 years trying to survive Tuesday mornings and November anniversaries. She watched him lean down to whisper something in the girl's ear. Watched the girl roll her eyes with teenage exasperation, that universal gesture of daughters annoyed by overprotective fathers. Watched them move through the crowd like they'd performed this choreography 1,000 times. Like they were family. And everything Gloria thought she knew about the worst night of her life, it was about to unravel. A woman nearby, someone in pearls with champagne breath, leaned toward her companion. "That's David Miller. His daughter Debbie is so sweet, volunteers at the hospital every summer. Such a good girl." Debbie. The name hit Gloria like a fist to the sternum. All the air left her lungs in one violent exhale. The room tilted 15 degrees. The floor turned to liquid beneath her feet. Debbie. The name Gloria had chosen during her second trimester, lying in bed with David's hand on her swollen belly. The name she'd whispered to her daughter for 9 months like a promise. The name she'd sobbed into hospital pillows when they told her the baby didn't make it. But the baby had made it. Here's what you need to understand. This isn't a case of mistaken identity. This isn't coincidence. She was alive, standing 20 feet away, laughing, living, breathing. And David, the man who'd abandoned Gloria in her darkest hour, had raised her. But there was something Gloria didn't know yet. Something that would make this betrayal so much worse. Gloria's vision blurred. The champagne-scented air became too thick to breathe. Somewhere in the rational part of her brain, the part that still functioned when the world was ending, a voice screamed that this was impossible. That death certificates don't lie. That hospitals don't make mistakes like this. But that girl had Gloria's dimples. Had her way of tucking hair behind her left ear, had her exact shade of gray-blue eyes that looked silver in certain light. And I need you to really hear this next part. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds will set everything in motion. David scanned the crowd with that CEO's gaze, polite, distant, cataloging faces and calculating social capital, until his eyes landed on Gloria. He froze. Not the calculated pause of a businessman recognizing an acquaintance. The full-body lockup of a man seeing a ghost. Color drained from his face, like someone had pulled a plug. His hand slipped from Debbie's shoulder. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Just shocked silence, and something that looked almost like terror. They stared at each other across 20 feet and 16 years of grief, betrayal, and unanswered questions neither of them thought they'd ever have to face. Debbie noticed. Her teenage awareness picked up on her father's sudden paralysis. "Dad?" Her voice was soft, concerned, exactly what a loving daughter sounds like. "What's wrong?" David didn't answer, couldn't answer. He was already moving not toward the stage, or the donors, or the press vultures circling with cameras. Toward Gloria. His stride was mechanical, like a man walking toward a car accident he couldn't look away from. Like someone approaching the edge of a cliff, to see if the fall was really as bad as they remembered. Gloria couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything except watch him approach, while every cell in her body screamed, "Run and stay." And how is this happening all at once? What he says next will change everything. But nothing will prepare Gloria for the truth behind it. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, deeper than they should be on a man barely 40. Close enough to see gray threading through hair that used to be solid, dark brown. Close enough to notice the wedding ring on his left hand. A wedding ring. He'd moved on, found someone else, built a whole life while Gloria was still treading water in the same grief that nearly drowned her 16 years ago. Gloria, her name left his mouth like a prayer or a curse, maybe both. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "You're alive." Yeah, let that sink in. You're alive. As if she was the one who was supposed to be dead. The words hit like a slap, like an accusation. Like 16 years of misunderstanding compressed into 3 syllables. You're alive. As if he'd thought she was dead. As if he hadn't walked away from her when she needed him most. As if 16 years of silence was somehow her fault. Something inside Gloria, the thing that had spent 16 years locked in that room with the grief and the rage and the guilt, broke loose. 16 years of wondering if she'd done something wrong. 16 years of mourning alone. 16 years of thinking he'd abandoned her because she wasn't enough. And he thought she was dead? The truth behind those words? It's going to destroy them both before it sets them free. "You told me she died." Her voice barely qualified as a whisper, but it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every birthday she'd mourned alone, every moment She'd wondered what her daughter's first word would have been, what her laugh would have sounded like, whether she'd have liked art, or math, or music. David flinched like she'd struck him across the face. His entire body recoiled. "I never said that." "Gloria, what are you talking about?" Behind him, Debbie had moved closer. Teenage curiosity overriding social caution. She was staring at Gloria with those impossible eyes. Gloria's eyes, and something in her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to dawning fear. What Debbie's about to hear will fracture her identity, but we're just getting to the good part. "Who is she?" Debbie's voice cut through the tension. Young, uncertain, a girl who suddenly sensed her entire world was about to shift. Gloria's throat closed. She wanted to scream, to run, to grab this girl and never let go, to shake David until he told her the truth about what he'd done. To rewind 16 years and fight harder to see her baby's body. To demand answers, to not accept the lie that destroyed her. Watch what Gloria does next, because this moment takes more courage than 16 years of surviving did. Instead, she met her daughter's eyes, alive and real and right there, and said the word she'd been denied for 16 years. "I'm your mother." The room fell away. Donors disappeared. Security guards vanished. String quartet faded to white noise. There was only this girl, her girl, staring at her with dawning horror. And David looking between them, like the ground had opened beneath his feet, and he was falling into darkness. Debbie's face crumpled. Her olive skin went pale. Her hands started shaking. "That's impossible," her voice cracked. "My mother, you left. You didn't want me." Each word was a knife, carefully placed, expertly twisted. Gloria shook her head, tears spilling before she could stop them. "I was told you died. They said you didn't survive. I begged to see you. They wouldn't let me. I thought," her voice broke into shards, "I thought I lost you. But the truth? The truth is so much worse than either of them imagines." David staggered back 2 steps, hand pressed to his chest like he was having a heart attack. When he spoke, his voice was raw and broken. "Someone lied to both of us." And in that moment, surrounded by the wealthy and powerful, by cameras and caterers and people who had no idea their world was imploding, Gloria understood something terrible. Something that made the past 16 years even crueler. Her daughter had been stolen. Her motherhood had been erased. And the man standing in front of her, the man she'd hated for 16 years, might not have been the villain after all. But if David didn't do it, if he truly believed she'd abandoned them, then who did? And more terrifying, why? The answer to that question? It involves more money than most people see in a lifetime. And we're just getting started. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, Gloria watched 16 years of lies collapse in her daughter's eyes. Debbie looked at David, then at Gloria, then back at David, searching his face for contradiction, for denial, for anything that would make this stranger's words untrue. David's jaw tightened. His hand lifted toward Debbie's shoulder, that same protective gesture Gloria had seen earlier, but the girl stepped back before he could touch her. "No." Debbie's voice cracked like breaking glass. "No, you're lying. My mother didn't. She wasn't. I never left you." Gloria's words tumbled out desperate and raw. 16 years of grief, compressed into 4 syllables. "Debbie, I swear to you, I never left. I would have died before I left you." Around them, the gala continued its polite buzz. Donors clinked champagne flutes. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable. But in this small circle, mother, father, daughter, the world was ending. David's voice cut through like a blade. "Gloria, we need to talk. Privately." Privately. Gloria's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "You kept my daughter from me for 16 years, and you want privacy?" "I didn't keep her from anyone." His composure cracked, and beneath it was something Gloria hadn't expected. Genuine confusion. Real pain. "You disappeared. The hospital said you checked yourself out. No forwarding information, no contact. I came back from the emergency with my father, and you were gone." The words hit like physical blows, each one landing in a different wound. That's not what happened. Then, what did happen? His voice rose enough that a nearby couple glanced over. David noticed, and when he spoke again, his tone was controlled. Deadly calm. "Because I held a newborn in the NICU at 3 a.m., while nurses told me her mother abandoned her. I signed papers alone. I brought her home to an empty house, and wondered what I'd done that was so terrible you couldn't even say goodbye. Gloria's chest tightened. This wasn't the story she knew. This wasn't the man who chose business over family. This was someone else's nightmare overlapping with hers. But before she could respond, Debbie made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, and bolted. She moved fast for someone in heels, weaving through the crowd toward the exit like she was drowning and the door was oxygen. David swore under his breath and moved to follow, but Gloria caught his arm. You'll make it worse, he said, pulling free. But he didn't chase after Debbie. He stood there, frozen between two impossible choices, watching his daughter disappear through the doors. When he turned back to Gloria, something in his expression had shifted. The CEO mask had crumbled. What remained looked exhausted, lost, human. "The courtyard," he said quietly. 5 minutes. We do this properly or we don't do it at all. He left before she could argue. Gloria stood alone in the center of the fundraiser, surrounded by strangers who had no idea she'd just been resurrected from a grave she'd been buried in alive. Her hands shook, her vision blurred. Somewhere in the rational part of her mind, she knew she should leave. Drive home. Process this in private. But Debbie was here. Her daughter alive, real, breathing was somewhere in this building. She wasn't leaving. The courtyard was empty, except for string lights and the distant hum of traffic. David stood near the fountain, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders tight as bridge cables. Gloria stepped out, letting the door close behind her. The night air was cool enough to make her shiver. "Tell me what happened." David's voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the razor edge beneath. "The night Debbie was born." "What do you remember?" Gloria wrapped her arms around herself. "I remember pain. I remember you leaving. My father had a stroke." The words came fast, defensive. "I got the call during your labor. He was in intensive care. They said I had minutes to say goodbye." "Minutes, Gloria. I kissed your forehead and promised I'd be back before." His voice caught. "I thought I had time." She remembered that part, barely. Through the haze of contractions and fear, she remembered David's panicked face, a nurse pushing him toward the door, his promise that he'd be back. He never came back. "When I returned 4 hours later," David continued, "you were gone. They said you delivered, declined to see the baby, and checked out against medical advice. They gave me a form with your signature. I never signed anything." The words felt hollow even as she said them, because she'd been drugged, exhausted, barely conscious. Had she signed something without realizing? No. She knew what happened next. "They told me she died," Gloria whispered. "The doctor, Dr. Ruiz, he came into my room after I woke up, said there were complications, that she didn't make it. I begged him to let me see her, to hold her. He said it wasn't recommended, that I needed to heal first." Her throat tightened. "When I was discharged 2 days later, they gave me a death certificate." David stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "A death certificate." "I buried an empty casket, David. I had a funeral. Your family didn't come. Your mother sent flowers with a card that said, 'Perhaps it's for the best.' The memory still burned after 16 years. I thought you all blamed me. Thought I'd done something wrong. Jesus Christ." David ran a hand through his hair. And for the first time since she'd seen him tonight, he looked breakable. "I was told you left, that you wanted nothing to do with us, that you'd signed away parental rights. I would never." "I know." He cut her off, voice rough. "I know that now. But 16 years ago? After you didn't return my calls? After the hospital showed me paperwork with your name on it? I believed it." The truth settled between them like a third presence. Heavy, undeniable, terrifying. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had separated them, stolen their daughter from Gloria, convinced David he'd been abandoned. Someone had destroyed their family with surgical precision. Who? Gloria's voice shook. Who would do this? David's expression hardened into something she remembered from their marriage, the look he got when someone threatened what was his. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." A door opened behind them. Debbie stood in the threshold, mascara-streaked face pale in the courtyard lights. She looked younger than 16. She looked shattered. "Is it true?" Her voice was small, broken. "You didn't leave?" Gloria's heart cracked wide open. "I didn't leave, baby. I promise you, I didn't leave. But you weren't there." Debbie's words tumbled out, fast and jagged. You weren't at my first day of school. You weren't there when I learned to ride a bike. You weren't. Her breath hitched. Dad said you didn't want me, that you chose yourself over me. David flinched, like she'd driven a knife between his ribs. Debbie, I thought. You lied. She turned on him with sudden fury. You said she abandoned us. You said she was selfish. You made me hate her. I didn't make you hate anyone, David said quietly. I told you what I believed was true. But it wasn't true. Debbie's voice rose sharp enough to crack. She was here the whole time, and you never looked for her. I did look. David's composure finally cracked. For 2 years I hired investigators. They found nothing. Eventually I had to accept. He stopped. Swallowed hard. I had to accept what I was told. Debbie wrapped her arms around herself, and Gloria saw the gesture she'd done 1,000 times. The same defensive posture. The same need to hold broken pieces together. I don't know who I am anymore, Debbie whispered. Gloria took a step forward. Every instinct screamed to pull her daughter into her arms, to hold her the way she dreamed of for 16 years. But Debbie stepped back, and Gloria forced herself to stop. You're Debbie, Gloria said softly. You're smart and kind, and you volunteer at hospitals in the summer. You're everything I hoped you'd be. How do you know that? Because I've been watching you since the moment I saw you, Gloria's voice broke. Because even if I couldn't hold you, I was still your mother. Debbie stared at her with those impossible gray-blue eyes. Eyes that held 16 years of questions, confusion, and a desperate need for truth. Then she turned and walked back inside. David exhaled slowly. She needs time. I've given her 16 years. I can wait a little longer. But Gloria's voice broke on the last word, and suddenly she was crying ugly. Gasping sobs she couldn't control. David stood there, clearly uncomfortable, clearly not knowing what to do. Then, slowly, he put a hand on her shoulder. You deserved better than this, he said quietly. You deserved to watch her grow up, to be there for every moment. His voice roughened. I'm sorry I didn't look harder. I'm sorry I believed the lie. Gloria couldn't speak, could only stand there in a parking garage at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, crying for everything that had been stolen. And David, the man who'd spent 16 years thinking she'd abandoned them, stood witness to the depth of pain he'd never known she carried. After a long moment, he pulled back. We need to investigate this, properly. Hospital records, the doctor who delivered her, anyone who was involved that night. Dr. Ruiz. I'll have my lawyer pull everything. He paused. Can you meet tomorrow? My office. 10 a.m. Gloria nodded, not trusting her voice. David started to leave, then stopped. When he looked back, something ancient and painful lived in his expression. I'm sorry. For believing the worst. For not trying harder to find you. You thought I left. That doesn't make it right. He hesitated. You deserved better than that. Then he was gone, following his daughter back into the warmth and light of the gala. Gloria stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by string lights and the sound of distant music. Her hands still shook. Her chest still ached. But for the first time in 16 years, the ache felt different. Because her daughter was alive, and someone was going to answer for stealing her. She drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the turns, the stoplights, the 20 minutes between the event center and her small apartment across town. She climbed the stairs, unlocked her door, and stood in the darkness of her living room, still wearing her coat. On the mantel sat a photograph from 16 years ago, her and David on their wedding day, young and stupid, and convinced love was enough to survive anything. Next to it was a small silver frame with an ultrasound image, the only picture she had of her daughter. Except her daughter wasn't a grainy black and white outline anymore. She was real, tall, beautiful, alive. Gloria sank onto the couch and let herself cry, not the grief she'd carried for 16 years, but something newer. Something that tasted like rage and hope, and the terrifying possibility that she might get her daughter back. Someone had done this. Someone had separated them, manipulated them, destroyed their family. And tomorrow, she was going to start finding out who. But tonight she let herself imagine what 16 years of memories might have looked like. First steps, first words, kindergarten graduations, middle school drama, the thousands of tiny moments that make a childhood. All of it stolen. All of it waiting to be reclaimed. Gloria arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, ordered coffee she wouldn't drink, and chose a corner booth where her back was to the wall. Old survival instinct from the months after the divorce, always know where the exits are. David walked in at exactly 10 a.m. Punctual, always had been. He scanned the room with that CEO's efficiency, spotted her, and approached with two thick manila folders under his arm. He slid into the booth across from her without asking. Up close, in morning light instead of gala chandeliers, he looked more tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from sleepless nights, not long workdays. Debbie didn't come home until 3 a.m., he said, answering the question Gloria hadn't asked. She stayed at her best friend's house, won't return my calls. Gloria's chest tightened. Is she okay? Define okay. David opened one of the folders. She's not hurt, but she's 16, and her entire identity just imploded. So no, she's not okay. The words sat heavy between them. Gloria wanted to ask if she could see her, talk to her, explain. But she already knew the answer. David pulled out a document. This is the discharge paperwork from the hospital. Your signature, or what they claim, is your signature releasing parental rights. Gloria took the paper with shaking hands. The signature looked nothing like hers. The loops were wrong. The slant was off. But it was close enough that someone unfamiliar with her handwriting might not notice. I never signed this. I know. David produced another document. This is the death certificate you mentioned. She didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to see her daughter's name Deborah Ann Miller next to words like deceased and stillborn. But she forced herself to look. The doctor's signature at the bottom was illegible. But the printed name was clear. Dr. Marcus Ruiz, MD. He told me to my face, she didn't survive, Gloria whispered. I was alone in that room, barely conscious from the anesthesia. And he stood there and told me my baby was dead. David's jaw tightened. I never met him. By the time I got back, a different doctor was handling Debbie's care. I asked about the delivery physician, and they said he'd finished his shift. Convenient. Gloria set the documents aside before she ripped them in half. What else did you find? David flipped through the folder. Debbie's birth records show routine delivery, no complications. Mother listed as declined parental contact. Father me listed as sole guardian. He paused. But here's what doesn't make sense. The timestamps. He spread 3 documents across the table. Gloria leaned forward. You delivered at 11:47 p.m. according to the birth certificate, but your discharge paperwork is timestamped 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes later. David's finger traced the dates. They claimed you checked yourself out while you were still in active labor? Gloria's stomach turned. That's impossible. Exactly. David pulled out another sheet. And my father's stroke, the one that pulled me away, happened at 10:30 p.m. I left the hospital at 10:45, but the nurse's log shows I didn't return until 2:15 a.m. He looked up. I was at the other hospital for 3.5 hours. Debbie was born during that window, and somehow, in that exact time frame, you were allegedly discharged, and I was told you'd abandoned us. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed made Gloria's blood run cold. Someone planned this, she said. Someone knew you'd be gone. Knew I'd be vulnerable. Or someone created the opportunity. David closed the folder. My father's stroke was real, but the timing. He trailed off, and Gloria saw something dangerous flicker in his expression. I'm going to find out who was on shift that night. Every nurse, every administrator, everyone who had access to those records. David, they stole 16 years from you. His voice was quiet, but lethal. They stole 16 years from Debbie, from all of us. He met her eyes, and for the first time since the gala, she saw past the CEO to the man she'd married. I'm going to make them pay. The hospital where Debbie was born had changed ownership twice since that night. Different name, different management. But medical records were forever. David's lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine who looked like she could negotiate with the devil and win, met them in the hospital's records department an hour later. The clerk, a middle-aged man with reading glasses on a chain, pulled files with bureaucratic slowness. Dr. Marcus Ruiz, he read from a screen. Left Miller Memorial in March 2010. No forwarding information. Why did he leave? Catherine asked. The clerk hesitated. I can't disclose personnel matters. Can't or won't. David's tone could have frozen water. The clerk glanced between them. Clearly recognizing David's face from business magazines, his resistance crumbled. There were complaints about ethical violations, but nothing was proven, so he was allowed to resign quietly. Gloria's hands clenched. What kind of violations? I really shouldn't. My daughter's medical records were falsified by this man. David's voice dropped to something deadly calm. If there's relevant information, I suggest you share it. The clerk typed something, read, then sighed. There were concerns about unauthorized adoptions. Patients claiming they were told babies died when they didn't, but the hospital investigated and found insufficient evidence. Dr. Ruiz left before it went further. The room tilted. Unauthorized adoptions. Patients told their babies died. Gloria gripped the edge of the desk. This wasn't a one-time lie. This was a pattern, a system. How many other mothers had been told the same thing? How many other families were destroyed? Catherine was already typing on her phone. I'll need copies of the investigation records, all of them. That requires a court order. Then, I'll have one by end of business today. Catherine didn't look up from her screen. And I'll need the names of every nurse and staff member who worked labor and delivery on November 12, 2009. The clerk's face paled, but he nodded and shuffled away. David turned to Gloria. Are you okay? She wasn't. She was the opposite of okay, but she nodded anyway because falling apart now wouldn't bring back 16 years. There's more, Catherine said, still typing. I pulled Debbie's adoption records this morning. Technically, there was no adoption. David was listed as biological father, but the mother's section. She turned her phone screen toward them. It's blank, just says, parental rights terminated. Gloria stared at the empty space where her name should have been, where her identity as Debbie's mother should have existed in legal documentation. She'd been erased. Not just from Debbie's life, from her birth records, from her legal existence as a mother. The clerk returned with a stack of papers. Catherine took them without comment and began photographing each page with her phone. Among the documents was a staff schedule from November 2009. Gloria scanned the names, looking for anyone familiar. Most were strangers, but one name made her pause. Nurse S. Patterson, night shift supervisor. I remember her, Gloria whispered. She was there when I woke up, before Dr. Ruiz came in. David looked at the schedule. She still works here. Different department now. They found Nurse Patterson in the pediatric wing, charting medications at a nurse's station. She was older now, gray streaking her dark hair, lines deepening around her eyes, but Gloria recognized her immediately. The nurse looked up as they approached, and something flickered across her face. Recognition. Fear. Mrs. Miller, she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Gloria's throat tightened. You remember me. Nurse Patterson set down her pen, glanced around the empty hallway. I remember a lot of things I wish I didn't. David stepped forward. What happened that night? The nurse was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Ruiz said the baby died. He told me to prepare the mother for discharge. I questioned it. The baby had been healthy, crying, perfect APGAR scores, but he said there were complications I didn't see. She looked at Gloria with something like shame. I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder. Did you see him falsify records? Catherine asked. I saw him take the baby to a different wing. Said she needed observation. I never saw her again after that. Nurse Patterson's hands trembled. When I asked later, I was told the family situation was complicated and to mind my own business. Then Dr. Ruiz left, and everyone just moved on. Who told you to mind your own business? David's voice was ice. Hospital administration. I don't remember who specifically, but I got the message. Don't ask questions, or you'll lose your job. She looked at Gloria. I had 3 kids and a mortgage. I'm not proud of it, but I stayed quiet. Gloria wanted to be angry, wanted to blame this woman for not fighting harder, but she heard the shame in Nurse Patterson's voice and knew some people were victims of this system too. Thank you, Gloria said softly, for telling us now. The nurse nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. They left the hospital in silence. Catherine peeled off to file court orders. David walked Gloria to her car in the parking garage. Debbie texted, he said suddenly. She wants to talk, tonight. Hope flared in Gloria's chest. Can I? She only wants to see me. David's expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry, she's not ready." The hope died. Gloria nodded, not trusting her voice. David hesitated. "She'll come around. She just needs time to process. I've waited 16 years. I can wait a little longer." But her voice broke on the last word. And suddenly, she was crying ugly, gasping sobs she couldn't control. David stood there, clearly uncomfortable, clearly not knowing what to do. Then, slowly, he put a hand on her shoulder. "You deserved better than this," he said quietly. "You deserve to watch her grow up. To be there for every moment." His voice roughened. "I'm sorry I didn't look harder. I'm sorry I believed the lie." Gloria couldn't speak, could only stand there in a parking garage at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, crying for everything that had been stolen. And David, the man who'd spent 16 years thinking she'd abandoned them, stood witness to the depth of pain he'd never known she carried. After a long moment, he pulled back. "We're going to find Ruiz, and whoever paid him, and we're going to make sure they answer for what they did." Gloria wiped her eyes. "Promise me something. Anything. When we find them," she met his gaze, "let me be there. I want to look them in the eye when they realize they failed." David's expression hardened into something she remembered from their marriage, the look he got when making promises he intended to keep. "I promise." David's attorney friend arrived at his office 3 days later with a banker's box and an expression that said he'd found something nobody wanted to see. John Bradford had known David since law school, the kind of friend who'd help you bury bodies if you asked, but would tell you exactly why it was a terrible idea first. He set the box on David's mahogany desk, with the reverence usually reserved for evidence in murder trials. Gloria sat across from David, hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. They'd barely spoken since the hospital, a few texts coordinating this meeting, nothing personal. Nothing that acknowledged the 16-year chasm between them, or the fragile bridge they were trying to build across it. John pulled out a thick file. "I called in every favor I had at Miller Memorial. Got access to archived records that should have been destroyed years ago." He looked between them. "You're not going to like what I found." "Show us," David said. John spread documents across the desk like a dealer laying out a losing hand. Birth certificates, discharge papers, medical records, and at the center of it all, 2 death certificates. Not 1, 2. Gloria leaned forward, her breath catching. The first was the certificate she'd been given 16 years ago. Official hospital letterhead. Dr. Marcus Ruiz's signature. Cause of death, listed as respiratory complications. But the second certificate printed on the same letterhead, bearing the same date, told a different story. Cause of death, none. Status, live, birth, healthy. Mother's signature line, blank. "They made 2 versions," John said quietly. "One for you," he nodded at Gloria, "and one for the actual hospital records. The real one shows Debbie was born alive. The fake one gave you a dead baby to grieve." Gloria's vision blurred. She'd known logically, she'd known the certificate was false the moment she saw Debbie alive. But seeing the proof, the calculated cruelty of creating 2 separate realities, made her stomach turn. "There's more," John continued. He pulled out another document, the custody release form David had been shown. "This signature? I had it analyzed by a forensic document examiner." David looked up sharply. "And?" "It's a forgery, professional grade. Someone traced Gloria's signature from another document, probably insurance, paperwork, or hospital intake forms, and reproduced it well enough to pass casual inspection." John paused. "But under magnification? The pressure points are wrong. The ink shows hesitation marks. This wasn't signed by a person. It was created by someone who had access to Gloria's real signature and time to practice copying it." The words settled over the room like ash after a fire. "So someone," David's voice, "was carefully controlled. Someone systematically falsified medical records, forged legal documents, and separated a newborn from her mother." "Yes." "Why?" Gloria whispered. "Who does that? Who destroys a family for no reason?" "Oh, there was a reason." John pulled out a final document, a bank statement. "Dr. Ruiz received a wire transfer of $150,000 3 days before Debbie was born. Another $150,000 the day after. Both from an offshore account. $300,000. That's what her daughter had been worth. What 16 years of her life had cost someone." Gloria stood abruptly, chair scraping against hardwood. She walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself because if she didn't hold herself together, she would fly apart completely. Behind her, David's voice was cold enough to freeze steel. Can we trace the accounts? I'm working on it, but whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Multiple shell companies, offshore routing. This wasn't amateur hour. So someone wealthy, David said. Someone with resources and motivation to tear my family apart. The question hung in the air. Who hated them that much? They told Debbie together. David had asked Gloria to come to his house, a sprawling estate in the kind of neighborhood where security guards knew your name and gardeners worked in near silence. Gloria had never been here. This was the life David built after her. After their marriage shattered and he convinced himself she'd chosen to leave. Debbie sat on the living room couch, arms crossed, face set in teenage defiance. But Gloria could see the fear beneath it, the desperate need to understand why the ground kept shifting under her feet. David explained it carefully. The forged documents, the wire transfers, the systematic manipulation that had separated them. Debbie listened in silence. Then she stood up and hurled a decorative pillow across the room. Someone paid to take me from her? Her voice cracked. Like I was property? Like I was something to be sold? Debbie, David started. No, she whirled on him. Don't. You raised me to believe she didn't want me, that she chose herself over me. I hated her. Do you understand that? I hated her for 16 years. Gloria's chest cracked open. I don't blame you for that. Well, I blame me. Debbie's eyes were bright with tears. I blamed myself too. Wondered what was wrong with me, that my own mother would run away. And now you're telling me none of it was real? That my entire childhood was built on lies? Not all of it, David said quietly. I loved you. That was real. But you loved me thinking I'd been abandoned. You raised me to be strong because you thought I'd been rejected. Debbie's voice broke. What if you'd known the truth? What if we'd been a real family? Who would I be then? The question had no answer, because that version of Debbie, the one raised by both parents, the one who knew love instead of abandonment, didn't exist, could never exist. She'd been erased by someone's greed or hatred, or whatever sick motivation had driven them. And here's what you might be wondering. Who would do something this evil? Stay with me. Because the answer is about to get even darker. Debbie looked at Gloria with an expression that mixed longing and fury. I want to hate you. It would be easier if I could just hate you and move on. You can, Gloria said softly. If that's what you need, I understand. But you're not who he said you were. Debbie wiped her eyes angrily. You're not selfish. You're not cold. You're just sad. And I'm the reason you're sad. You're not the reason. Gloria took a step forward. The person who did this is the reason. You're just a daughter who deserves better than the hand she was dealt. Debbie stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and ran upstairs. David moved to follow, but Gloria caught his arm. Let her process. She's earned the right to be angry. She's not angry at the right people. Give her time to figure out who the right people are. David exhaled slowly. He looked exhausted. Not the professional exhaustion of long board meetings, but something deeper. The kind of tired that came from watching your daughter's world implode and knowing you couldn't fix it with money or power. I should have known, he said quietly. The day they told me you left, I should have questioned it. Should have demanded proof. Should have done literally anything, except accept what I was told. You were handed a newborn and told you were alone. What were you supposed to do? Fight harder. His voice was raw. I gave up on us. I convinced myself you were capable of walking away. And I didn't fight. Because part of me was angry. Angry that you'd leave me with a baby I had no idea how to raise. Angry that my father was dying and my wife was gone and I had to figure it all out alone. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. That anger made me stop looking when I should have torn the city apart to find you. Gloria's throat tightened. This was the apology she'd needed 16 years ago. The acknowledgement that she hadn't been forgotten, even if she'd been abandoned. Someone wanted us separated, she said. Someone went to enormous effort and expense to make sure we never found each other again. That's not your fault. It's someone's fault. David's expression hardened, and John is going to find out who. They stood in David's kitchen an hour later, both nursing coffee neither of them wanted. Upstairs, Debbie's door remained closed. She asked me something last night, David said suddenly. Asked if I ever missed you. If I ever wondered what our lives would have looked like if things had been different. Gloria's heart clenched. What did you say? The truth. He stared into his coffee cup. That I thought about you every day for the first 5 years. That I drove past our old apartment sometimes just to see if your car was there. That I almost called you 100 times, but convinced myself you deserved to move on without me dragging you back into the mess. I never moved on, Gloria whispered. I just learned to live around the grief. I know that now. David looked up. I see it in your eyes. The same loss I saw in the mirror for years, before I buried it under work and board meetings, and pretending I was fine. The admission hung between them, not quite forgiveness, not quite reconciliation, but something raw and honest that hadn't existed in their marriage before it shattered. We can't get those years back, Gloria said, but we can find out who took them. John thinks he can trace the wire transfers within a week, maybe 2. And then we make them answer for what they did. David's voice was cold. To you, to Debbie, to all of us. Gloria set down her coffee cup. I want to be there when you do. You'll be there. He paused. This isn't just my fight anymore. It never should have been. For the first time since the gala, Gloria felt something shift between them. Not love that had been burned away by 16 years of grief and anger, but something like partnership, like the fragile beginning of a united front. We do this together, she said. David extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Gloria took it. His grip was firm, certain, the handshake of two people entering a contract neither of them planned to break. Together, he agreed, until we find the truth, until everyone responsible pays, until Debbie gets the answers she deserves. And then, David's expression softened slightly. Then we figure out how to be a family again. However that looks. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. Wasn't a declaration of renewed love or a fairy tale ending. But it was hope. Fragile, uncertain, built on the ashes of everything they'd lost. And for now, hope was enough. John Bradford called on a Thursday morning with the kind of news that changes everything. I found him, he said without preamble. The person who paid Ruiz. You're not going to believe this. David put the phone on speaker. Gloria sat across from him in his office, fingers gripping her coffee cup hard enough to crack porcelain. Tell us, David said. The shell company that wired $300,000 to Dr. Ruiz, it's buried under 6 layers of corporate structures, but I traced it back to its source. John paused. Wilder. Marcus Wilder. Your former business partner. The name hit Gloria like a physical blow. She remembered Wilder. Tall, cold smile. The kind of man who calculated profit margins while discussing his daughter's birthday party. He'd been at their wedding, shaking David's hand and saying something about how marriage made men soft. David had laughed it off then. He wasn't laughing now. Wilder paid Ruiz to separate us. David's voice was dangerously quiet. That's not all. John's tone shifted. I pulled Wilder's financial records from around that time. The year after Debbie was born, Miller Innovations' revenue tripled. You worked 80-hour weeks, traveled constantly, closed deals that should have taken years in months. He paused. Wilder's shares in the company made him a billionaire off your productivity. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Without Gloria, David had nothing to come home to except a newborn who needed constant care and a company that demanded everything he had, so he gave it everything. Poured his grief and rage and loneliness into building an empire. And Wilder had profited from every sleepless night, every missed milestone, every moment David spent working instead of healing. He engineered this, Gloria whispered. He destroyed our family for money. Not just money. John's voice was grim. I found emails from before Debbie was born. Wilder, to another board member. Quote, Miller's too soft with that wife of his. She makes him think about work-life balance. Once the kid is born, he'll be distracted for years. We need to handle this before he loses his edge. Gloria's blood turned to ice. Handle this. They planned it, David said slowly. His face had gone pale. Before Debbie was even born, they were planning to remove you from the equation. The magnitude of it was staggering. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was premeditated, calculated. Someone had looked at their marriage, at Gloria's influence on David, at the softness she brought to his relentless ambition, and decided she was a liability that needed to be eliminated. Where is Wilder now? David's voice could have cut glass. That's the problem. He sold his shares 3 years ago and moved to the Cayman Islands. Technically, he's beyond U.S. jurisdiction. Technically, David repeated. His smile was cold enough to freeze oceans. Tell me everything you have on him. They told Debbie that evening. She sat in David's study, legs tucked under her, looking younger than 16. Gloria had learned to read her daughter's moods over the past few weeks. The way she crossed her arms when she was defensive. The way her voice went quiet when she was breaking inside. Right now, she was breaking. Someone paid money to destroy our family? Debbie's voice was barely above a whisper. Like we were a business transaction? Not someone, David said. Wilder. My business partner. Someone I trusted. Someone you chose over us. The words came out sharp, accusatory. David flinched. I didn't know. But you would have stayed at the office that night anyway, right? Even without the conspiracy? Debbie looked between them. You said you were at a board meeting when Mom went into labor. You said you almost didn't leave. The truth sat heavy in the room. Because Debbie was right. David had been at that meeting, had considered staying because a merger was on the line, and billions of dollars hung in the balance. Wilder hadn't created David's workaholic tendencies. He'd just weaponized them. I would have chosen you, David said quietly. I would have chosen your mother and you over any deal. But Wilder didn't give me the chance to prove it. Would you? Gloria's voice was softer than she intended. But the question had lived in her chest for 16 years. If your father hadn't had a stroke that night, if everything had gone normally, would you have been there for the birth? David met her eyes. I want to say yes. But honestly, I don't know. I was younger, stupider, convinced that providing for you meant working myself to death. His voice roughened. Wilder saw that weakness and exploited it. He knew if he gave me a crisis that pulled me away at exactly the right moment, I'd leave. And once I was gone, he could execute the rest of his plan. So he waited, Gloria said. Waited until I was most vulnerable. Most alone. Your father's stroke wasn't coincidental, was it? Debbie asked suddenly. David stilled. What do you mean? Grandfather was healthy, ran marathons, ate clean. Then suddenly he has a massive stroke the night I'm born? Debbie's eyes were sharp. Too sharp for someone so young. That's convenient timing. John had said the same thing when they'd discussed it earlier. Smith Miller's medical record showed no prior indicators, no family history, no warning signs. Just a catastrophic stroke that happened to occur at the exact moment David needed to be away from Gloria. We can't prove it, David said carefully. But you suspect it. Debbie's voice hardened. How much did grandfather's care cost Wilder? A few $100,000 to stage a medical emergency, compared to the billions he made off you? The thought had crossed Gloria's mind too. The horrifying possibility that Wilder hadn't just manipulated events, he'd created them. That Smith Miller's stroke was another piece of the conspiracy, another domino carefully placed to fall at exactly the right moment. He's a monster, Debbie whispered. And he got away with it. He hasn't gotten away with anything yet. David's voice carried a promise. John is building a case. We're going to expose everything Wilder did. And then what? Debbie looked at her parents, really looked at them, and Gloria saw something ancient and sad in her daughter's eyes. Will it give me back 16 years? Will it give Mom back the life she deserved? Will it make us a normal family? The answer was no, but none of them could say it out loud. Now, before we go further, I need you to do something. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the ache of losing time you can't get back, hit that subscribe button, because stories like Gloria's don't get told enough. Women like her, women who survive the unthinkable and keep fighting, they deserve to be heard. And there are more stories coming that you won't want to miss. After Debbie went to bed, Gloria and David sat in his study nursing glasses of whiskey. Neither of them were drinking. I keep thinking about the what-ifs, Gloria said quietly. What if Wilder had never interfered? What if you'd been there when she was born? We'd probably still be married, David said. Would we? Gloria turned to him. Because I remember our fights before I got pregnant. The nights you didn't come home. The promises you made and broke. Because work always came first. David's jaw tightened. I was building something. For us. No, you were building something for you. I just happened to be along for the ride. The words came out softer than she intended. Not accusatory, just true. Wilder saw that. He saw a man who valued success over stability. Who would sacrifice family for fortune if pushed hard enough? That's not fair, isn't it? Gloria met his eyes. He wouldn't have targeted us if our marriage was solid. He found a crack and drove a wedge into it. The silence stretched. Because she was right. Their marriage had been fracturing long before Debbie was born. The late nights, the missed anniversaries, the growing distance between a woman who wanted partnership and a man who wanted empire. Wilder hadn't destroyed something healthy. He just accelerated something already dying. I loved you, David said quietly. I know. But you loved your work more. That's not. He stopped. Took a breath. Maybe it was, back then. But losing you, thinking I'd lost you, it broke something in me, Gloria. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that didn't remind me of what I'd failed at. Gloria's chest tightened. What did you fail at? Being a husband, being a father, being a man who deserved the family he had. David's voice cracked. Every deal I closed, every company I acquired, every billion I made, it was all trying to prove I was worth something. That I could succeed at something even if I couldn't keep my wife from leaving. I didn't leave. I know that now. But 16 years ago, I believed it. Convinced myself you'd seen through me. Seen the workaholic who'd missed your doctor's appointments and forgotten date nights, and was probably going to be a terrible father. He looked at her with something raw and broken. Part of me thought you were right to leave. That Debbie was better off without a father who didn't know how to prioritize family. Gloria's throat burned. You weren't a terrible father. How would you know? The question landed like a slap. Because she wouldn't know. Couldn't know. She'd been erased from Debbie's childhood. Denied every moment, every memory, every chance to see the man David had become after he thought she'd abandoned them. She loves you, Gloria said finally. She's angry right now, but I see how she looks at you. You raised a good person, David. Whatever mistakes you made in our marriage, you didn't repeat them with her. Because I learned. His voice was barely a whisper. Learned too late, but I learned. That work doesn't love you back. That empires are hollow if you build them alone. That the only thing that matters at the end of the day is the people you come home to. He looked at her with something that might have been longing or regret or the ghost of the love they'd buried 16 years ago. If I could go back, if I could have one more chance to do it right, I wouldn't leave that hospital. I wouldn't miss the birth. I wouldn't believe anyone who said you'd abandoned us. His voice broke. I would fight for you, for us. The way I should have from the beginning. Gloria's eyes burned. You can't change the past. No, but maybe, he stopped, started again. Maybe we can change what comes next. The words hung between them, not quite an offer, not quite a promise, but something trembling on the edge of possibility. David, I'm not asking for another chance at marriage. I'm not asking you to forgive me or forget what happened. He met her eyes. I'm just asking if there's any part of you that thinks we could be friends, partners, co-parents who don't hate each other. Gloria's throat tightened. Because there was a part of her, the part that remembered loving this man, the part that saw him with Debbie and recognized the father he'd become, that wanted exactly that. But there was another part that remembered every broken promise, every lonely night, every moment she'd mourned alone. I don't know, she said honestly. Ask me after we destroy Wilder. David's expression shifted into something cold and determined. Then let's destroy him. Debbie hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd come downstairs for water, bare feet, silent on the hardwood, and heard their voices drifting from her father's study. The kind of half-closed that meant adults thought they had privacy, but sound still carried. She should have announced herself, should have walked past, should have done literally anything except stop at the bottom of the stairs and listen. But she stopped, and what she heard broke her all over again. Our marriage was failing long before Debbie was born. Gloria's voice, sad but certain. Wilder just accelerated what was already happening. A pause, then her father. So you think we would have divorced anyway? I think you loved your work more than you loved me. And eventually, I would have gotten tired of competing with boardrooms for your attention. Debbie's chest tightened. She pressed against the wall, barely breathing. That's not fair, her father said. I was building a life for us. No, David, you were building a life for you. I just happened to exist in the margins of it. The words landed like stones in dark water. Because Debbie had seen glimpses of this truth her whole life, the late nights, the missed school events, the way her father's phone was always in his hand, even during dinner, she'd assumed it was normal, that all successful fathers were like this. But what if it wasn't normal? What if the man who'd raised her was fundamentally incapable of putting family first? If we'd stayed together, Gloria continued, what kind of marriage would Debbie have grown up watching? What would we have taught her about love? That it requires sacrifice. No, that women accept scraps while men chase glory. Gloria's voice broke. I don't regret loving you, David, but I regret thinking I could compete with your ambition and win. Silence. Then her father's voice, quieter. You would have left eventually anyway. Maybe. Or maybe we would have fought for it. But Wilder made sure we never got that chance. Debbie backed away from the door, her vision blurring. She'd spent weeks trying to understand who she was in the wake of all these revelations. Was she the abandoned daughter or the stolen one? Was she the product of love or the casualty of a conspiracy? But now she understood something worse. Her parents' marriage had been broken from the start. Wilder hadn't destroyed something whole. He'd just given a dying relationship a violent push off the cliff, which meant everything about her existence was built on a foundation of failure. She turned and ran. Not to her room. Not to somewhere safe. She grabbed her coat from the hall closet and slipped out the front door before anyone could stop her. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter. She didn't go back for it. She just needed to breathe, to think, to exist somewhere that didn't feel like quicksand. David discovered she was gone 20 minutes later. Gloria was still in the study when she heard his footsteps fast, heavy, wrong. She looked up as he appeared in the doorway, face pale. Debbie's gone. Gloria was on her feet instantly. What do you mean, gone? Her coat's missing, front doors unlocked, phones on the counter. His voice was steady, but his hands shook. She left. They checked her room empty, called her friends, no one had heard from her. Checked the garage, her car was still there. She's on foot, David said, already pulling up security footage on his phone. She left. He checked the timestamp. 32 minutes ago. Gloria's mind raced. A 16-year-old girl, emotionally shattered, alone in the city at night. The possibilities were endless, and none of them were good. Where would she go? David asked. Somewhere familiar? A friend's house? Gloria thought about the daughter she barely knew. The girl who'd been raised without her, who carried wounds Gloria couldn't see. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere, she can think. They split up. David took his car and headed toward Debbie's school and the coffee shop she frequented. Gloria took her car toward the waterfront, the parks, the pier, the places a grieving teenager might go to feel small against something bigger. She drove through streets she'd navigated 1,000 times, searching faces on sidewalks, peering into bus stops and park benches. Her phone sat in the passenger seat. No calls, no texts, just silence and the growing fear that they were already too late. What if Debbie did something reckless? What if she was hurt? What if Gloria had waited 16 years to find her daughter, only to lose her again? She pulled over near Riverside Park, got out, and started walking. The pier stretched into darkness ahead, lit by vintage lampposts that cast pools of yellow light. A few couples walked hand in hand. A jogger passed. But mostly it was empty, the kind of empty that felt intentional. And there, at the far end of the pier, sitting on a bench with her back to the world, was Debbie. Gloria's heart nearly stopped. Relief crashed through her so hard she had to grab a lamppost to steady herself. She approached slowly, giving Debbie time to hear her footsteps and decide whether to run again. But Debbie didn't run. She just sat there, staring at the dark water, shoulders shaking. Gloria stopped a few feet away. Your dad's losing his mind looking for you. Good. Debbie's voice was raw. He should know what it feels like to lose someone. Gloria sat down on the bench, careful to leave space between them. You heard us talking. I heard you say your marriage was failing, that Wilder just sped up what was already happening. Debbie turned, and her face was streaked with tears. So what does that make me? The last-ditch attempt to save something already dead? No. You were loved, wanted, planned. But I wasn't enough to hold you together. Debbie's voice cracked. Even if Wilder hadn't interfered, you would have divorced anyway. Which means I would have grown up in a broken home no matter what. Gloria wanted to argue, to say that wasn't true. But Debbie deserved honesty more than comfort. Maybe, Gloria said quietly, or maybe having you would have changed us, made us fight harder, made us realize what actually mattered. But you don't know that. No, I don't. Gloria looked at the water. All I know is that someone stole the chance for us to find out. Someone decided our family didn't deserve to exist and took active steps to destroy it. You know what? If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, if your heart is breaking for this girl trying to figure out who she is, do me a favor, leave a comment. Tell me about a time when your whole world shifted and you had to rebuild your identity from scratch. Because Debbie needs to know she's not alone, and neither are you. Debbie was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. Younger, I don't know who I am anymore. For 16 years I was the girl whose mother didn't want her. I built my entire identity around being strong enough to survive that. She looked at Gloria. But now, you're here, and you did want me. So who am I? What was the point of all that strength if it was protecting me from a lie? Gloria's throat burned. This was the question she'd feared, the one that had no good answer. Because the truth was that Debbie's entire identity had been shaped by Wilder's cruelty. The girl sitting beside her had been molded by abandonment that never happened, by rejection that was fabricated, by a wound that shouldn't have existed. You're mine, Gloria whispered. Every day I mourned you, you were mine. Every birthday I couldn't celebrate, every milestone I missed, you were still mine. She turned to face her daughter. Wilder took 16 years. He took memories and moments and a childhood we'll never get back. But he didn't take the fact that you're my daughter. That lives in your DNA, in your eyes that look like mine, in the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. Debbie's face crumpled. But I don't know how to be your daughter. I don't know how to be anything except what I already am. Then be what you already are. Gloria's voice broke. Be angry. Be confused. Be exactly the mess you are right now. You don't have to have it figured out. You just have to keep breathing until it makes sense again. Debbie stared at her with those impossible gray-blue eyes. Eyes that held 16 years of pain and confusion and desperate longing. What if it never makes sense? Then, we figure it out together. The words hung in the air between them. And then, slowly, so slowly, Gloria almost didn't believe it was happening. Debbie leaned forward. Gloria met her halfway, wrapping her arms around the daughter she'd been denied for 16 years. Debbie's shoulders shook with sobs, and Gloria held her tighter, pressing her face into dark curls that smelled like vanilla shampoo and teenage tears. This was the moment she'd imagined 1,000 times. The embrace she'd dreamed about every night for 16 years. But in her dreams, it had been perfect. Two people made whole by reunion. All wounds healed by love. The reality was messier. Debbie's body was rigid, with confusion, even as she clung to Gloria. Her sobs sounded like breaking more than healing. This wasn't the end of pain. It was the beginning of processing it. But it was real. It was happening. And for the first time since that terrible night in the hospital, Gloria was holding her daughter. I'm sorry, Debbie whispered against her shoulder. I'm sorry I hated you. I'm sorry I believed. Don't. Gloria pulled back enough to look at her. Don't apologize for surviving the lie they told you. You did what you had to do. Footsteps sounded on the pier. David appeared, out of breath, face tight with fear that dissolved into relief when he saw them. You scared me to death, he said, voice rough. Debbie pulled away from Gloria and stood. For a moment, she just looked at both her parents, the mother she'd been denied and the father who'd raised her on false premises. Then, she opened her arms. David crossed the distance in 3 strides, pulling Debbie into a hug that looked like desperation made physical. Gloria stood more slowly, hesitant, unsure if she belonged in this moment. But David reached out with one arm and pulled her into the embrace. The 3 of them stood there, at the end of the pier, broken and imperfect, and just barely starting to heal. Not a perfect family, not even a functional one yet, but a family trying. And for the first time in 16 years, that was enough. They drove back in David's car, Debbie tucked in the back seat with her head against the window. Exhaustion had finally won over emotion. She'd fallen asleep somewhere between the pier and the highway, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of someone who'd cried themselves past breaking. Gloria sat in the passenger seat, hyper-aware of David's hands on the steering wheel. The silence between them felt different now. Not hostile or awkward, just full. heavy with things unsaid for 16 years. When they pulled into David's driveway, he killed the engine, but didn't move. "Help me get her inside." Debbie barely stirred as David lifted her from the back seat. Gloria opened doors, turned on lights, pulled back bed covers. They moved around each other like they'd done this choreography before, like some muscle memory from a life they'd almost lived together still existed beneath the scar tissue. David set Debbie down gently, removed her shoes, pulled the blanket to her shoulders. For a moment he just stood there looking at her, this girl who was simultaneously the best thing he'd ever done and the living proof of everything that had been stolen from him. Gloria touched his arm. "She'll be okay." "Will she?" His voice was barely a whisper. "How does someone come back from this?" "The same way we did, one day at a time until it hurts less." They left the door cracked and descended the stairs in silence. The house felt too big suddenly. Too empty, despite the expensive furniture and art that probably cost more than Gloria made in a year. David stopped in the foyer. "I should drive you back to your car." Gloria had left her car at the park. She should say yes, should maintain the careful distance they'd established. Should go home to her small apartment and process this night alone, the way she'd processed everything else for 16 years. Instead, she said, "Do you have coffee?" Something shifted in David's expression. Relief maybe, or gratitude. "I have coffee." They stood in his kitchen, all marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. David made coffee with the kind of precision that said he'd learned to do this alone, in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep was impossible and work was the only escape. Gloria watched him move. Noticed the gray threading his temples, the fine lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried tension like a second skeleton. "You're staring," he said without turning around. "You look tired." "I am tired." He poured 2 cups, handed her one. 16 years tired. They migrated to the back patio, a sprawling space with outdoor furniture and a view of the city lights below. The night air was cool enough to raise goosebumps, but neither of them suggested going inside. David leaned against the railing, coffee cup cradled in both hands. "You're good with her, with Debbie." Gloria's throat tightened. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I. But she responded to you tonight, let you hold her. That's more than she's let me do in weeks." "You raised her," Gloria said quietly. "Whatever mistakes we made as a married couple, you didn't repeat them with her. She knows you love her." "Does she?" David's voice carried doubt. "Or does she know I tried to love her while grieving the woman I thought abandoned us both?" The confession hung in the air. Gloria gripped her coffee cup harder. "I saw pictures," David continued, "when I was looking for you in those first 2 years. The investigators found old photos you at art shows, teaching classes, living your life somewhere across town." He looked at her. "You were so close, 1.5 miles from my office, and I never knew." Gloria's chest ached. "I saw you too, in magazines, business sections. Billionaire CEO Miller closes another deal. You looked untouchable. Like you'd built this perfect life without me." "There was nothing perfect about it." David set down his coffee cup. "I built an empire on grief and anger. Every company I acquired was me trying to prove I didn't need anyone. Every billion was me trying to fill the hole you left. I didn't leave." "I know. But it felt like you did. It felt like I'd failed so completely as a husband that you couldn't even be in the same city as me." His voice roughened. "And the worst part? I understood. I looked at the man I'd been, the late nights, the broken promises, the way I chose boardrooms over you, and I thought maybe you were right to go." Gloria turned to face him fully. "I never thought you were a failure." "Then what did you think?" The question demanded honesty, so Gloria gave it to him. "I thought you were brilliant and driven and so focused on building something great that you forgot to notice the person standing beside you." Her voice steadied. "I thought you loved me, but not enough to choose me when it mattered. And I was tired of competing with your ambition for scraps of attention." David flinched but didn't look away. "You're right. About all of it. But I also thought," Gloria stopped, started again. "I thought maybe I wasn't enough. That if I'd been more interesting, more accomplished, more something, you wouldn't have needed work to fulfill you." "Gloria, let me finish." She needed to say this. Needed him to understand. "For 16 years I carried this grief, that maybe our daughter died because I wasn't worthy of keeping her. That the universe looked at me and decided I didn't deserve motherhood because I'd already failed at marriage. David's face went pale. You thought it was your fault? What else was I supposed to think? My husband left me alone during labor. My baby died. My marriage ended. The words spilled out faster now. I replayed every argument, every disappointment, every moment I'd let you down. Convinced myself that if I'd been a better wife, you would have been there. And if you'd been there, maybe she would have lived. Jesus Christ, Gloria. David crossed the distance between them in 2 strides. None of that was your fault. The marriage problems, those were on me. My choices, my failures. His voice broke. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too stupid to see it until you were gone. They stood inches apart now. Close enough that Gloria could see his chest rising and falling with emotion. Close enough that when he reached out, his fingertips brushed her wrist. The touch sent electricity through her. Not desire exactly though, there was that too, buried under 16 years of grief. But something deeper, recognition. The memory of how his hands used to feel. How his presence used to fill spaces. How loving him had once been the easiest thing in the world. I never stopped, David whispered. Gloria's breath caught. Never stopped what? Loving you. The words came out raw and broken. I tried. God, I tried. Convinced myself you were just the first chapter of my life, and I needed to move on. Dated other women. Even got engaged once. He laughed bitterly. Called it off 2 weeks before the wedding because she didn't argue with me the way you did. Didn't challenge me. Didn't make me want to be better. Gloria's vision blurred. David. Every woman I met, I compared to you. Every conversation felt shallow because they weren't you. Every achievement felt hollow because you weren't there to tell me I was being ridiculous. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. You were the only person who ever made me feel like David instead of Miller the CEO. And I lost that. Lost you. Lost the chance to be the husband you deserved. The confession broke something open in Gloria's chest. Because she'd spent 16 years believing he'd moved on easily. That she'd been forgettable. That their marriage had been a minor inconvenience in his march toward empire. But he'd carried the loss too. Differently maybe, but just as completely. I thought you didn't care, she whispered. Thought you were relieved when I was gone. No more nagging wife to slow you down. I cared. His other hand came up to cup her face. Gloria, I cared so much, it nearly destroyed me. Debbie was the only reason I survived those first years. Because she needed me to function. Needed me to be strong when all I wanted was to fall apart. They stood there under a street lamp's glow. 16 years of grief and misunderstanding finally spoken aloud. David's hand was warm against her cheek. His eyes held something she'd thought was dead, tenderness, longing, the ghost of who they'd been before everything shattered. Take a breath with me for a second. Because this moment, this raw, honest confession between 2 people who lost everything, it matters. And if it matters to you, if you're invested in seeing where this goes, hit that like button. Let me know you're here. Let me know you care about Gloria and David finding their way back. Because your support keeps stories like this alive. Gloria's heart hammered. Part of her wanted to close the distance. To kiss him and see if any of the old magic remained beneath the scar tissue. To find out if 2 broken people could somehow make each other whole again. But another part, the part that had spent 16 years learning to survive alone, remembered why they'd been fracturing even before Wilder's intervention. She stepped back. David's hand fell away. I can't, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Pain flashed across David's face, but he nodded. I understand. Do you? Because this, she gestured between them. This isn't 16 years ago. We're not the same people who got married thinking love was enough. We're older. More broken. And we have a daughter watching to see if we can be functional adults, or if we're going to implode again. I know. And even if we wanted to try, even if some part of me wanted to see if there's anything left worth salvaging, we have too much unresolved. Gloria wrapped her arms around herself. You said you loved me, but you also chose work over me repeatedly. And I don't know if that's changed, or if you're just lonely and nostalgic for something that never really worked. David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. You're right. About all of it. We have work to do. Trust to rebuild. And I don't know if we can ever be what we were. So what do? We start with honesty. With showing up for Debbie. with proving to each other that we can be in the same room without destroying what's left. He met her eyes. And maybe if we're lucky, we figure out how to be friends first, parents second. And everything else, we'll see. It wasn't a romantic declaration, wasn't a promise of reconciliation or happily ever after. But it was real, honest. The beginning of something that might actually survive because it was built on truth instead of fairy tales. Gloria extended her hand. Friends first? David looked at her, offered hand. Then he took it, his grip firm and certain. Friends first. They stood there in the cool night air, hands clasped, the weight of 16 years, and all there might have beens, settling between them like snow. It wasn't forgiveness yet, wasn't love resurrected, but it was a beginning. And for two people who'd spent 16 years living in the wreckage of what could have been, a beginning felt like everything. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Gloria was teaching a watercolor class to middle schoolers when her phone started buzzing. Once, twice, 10 times in 3 minutes. She ignored it until her assistant appeared in the doorway, face pale, holding her own phone like it might explode. "You need to see this." The headline was everywhere. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, every major network. Social media had already turned it into a wildfire. Billionaire CEO's daughter, stolen at birth in illegal adoption scheme. Below it, a photo Gloria didn't know existed, her and David and Debbie leaving the hospital after their visit to records. Someone had been following them, photographing them, waiting for the perfect moment to turn their private nightmare into public consumption. The article laid it all out. Dr. Ruiz's illegal adoption ring, the forged documents. Gloria told her baby was dead. David told she'd abandoned them. 16 years of separation, orchestrated by a man who'd profited from their pain. And at the center of it all, Debbie's name, her face, her entire life exposed for millions to dissect. Gloria's hands shook. How did they? Hospital employee leaked the investigation. Her assistant's voice was grim. Sold it to a reporter for $20,000. $20,000. That's what their privacy was worth. Gloria called David. He answered on the first ring. "I know," he said. "I'm handling it." "Handling what?" "David, this is everywhere. Debbie is at school being swarmed by reporters." His voice was tight, with barely controlled rage. "I'm on my way there now." The line went dead. Gloria saw the footage later. Someone had recorded it on their phone. Debbie, emerging from calculus, to find 30 reporters camped outside her classroom. Cameras flashing, questions shouted, microphones thrust in her face. "Debbie, how does it feel to know your mother's alive? Did your father know he was raising a stolen child? Are you angry at your parents for lying to you?" In the video, Debbie's face crumbled. She tried to push through the crowd, but they closed in tighter. A security guard appeared, then another, creating a barrier between the 16-year-old girl and the feeding frenzy. And then, David arrived. Gloria had never seen him move like that. He cut through reporters like a blade through water, his expression so cold that cameras actually stepped back. He reached Debbie, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and spoke 2 words that got picked up on every microphone. No comment. But his eyes said everything his mouth didn't. "Touch her again, and I will destroy you." David pulled Debbie from school that afternoon. Not temporarily, not for a few days. He withdrew her enrollment entirely and hired private tutors. "She's not going back there," he told Gloria when she arrived at his house an hour later. "Not to that school. Maybe not to any school. Not until this dies down." Debbie sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed constantly, texts from friends, former friends, people who'd never spoken to her before but suddenly wanted the inside story. Gloria sat beside her. "How bad is it?" Debbie handed over her phone without speaking. The messages were brutal. Some supportive, most invasive, a few cruel enough to make Gloria's blood boil. "So your whole life was a lie? Your dad is such a creep for keeping you from your real mom. I always knew there was something weird about you." Gloria set the phone down. "People are awful. They're curious." Debbie's voice was hollow. "They want to know how it feels to be the girl whose entire existence was a conspiracy theory that turned out to be true. You don't owe them answers." "Don't I?" Debbie looked at her. "They're going to write about me anyway, make up stories, decide who I am based on 30 seconds of video, at least if I tell my own story." "No," David's voice was sharp. You don't owe the world your trauma. You don't owe them your pain. And you sure as hell don't owe them a performance. But they won't leave us alone until... They won't leave us alone, period. David sat on Debbie's other side. So we make them. Security on the house. Lawyers on the outlets printing lies. And anyone who harasses you gets hit with a restraining order so fast their head spins. Debbie looked between her parents. You can't control the entire media. Watch me. By that evening, David had made good on the promise. Security teams appeared at Gloria's apartment building. At Debbie's tutoring center. At every location the family might frequent. David's lawyers sent cease and desist letters to 17 media outlets. 3 reporters found themselves facing harassment charges. And David himself called an emergency board meeting. Gloria wasn't there, but she heard about it later from John. David had walked into that boardroom, the same room where he'd spent 16 years building an empire, and resigned from 2 major positions. My daughter is more important than quarterly earnings, he'd said. And anyone who has a problem with that can accept my resignation. They'd tried to talk him out of it, offered compromises, reminded him of his obligations. He'd walked out anyway. When Gloria heard, something shifted in her chest. Because this was the man she'd needed 16 years ago. The one who chose family over boardrooms. The one who understood that some things mattered more than success. He'd learned. Too late for their marriage. But not too late for Debbie. Wilder's response came 48 hours later. Not a public statement, not an apology, a lawsuit. He was suing them for defamation, claiming the allegations were false, that his name had been dragged through the mud without evidence, that he deserved millions in damages for the harm to his reputation. The lawsuit was 90 pages of legal language that boiled down to one message: shut up or I'll destroy you financially. David's response was 3 sentences delivered to Wilder's lawyer via email. Discovery will be delightful. Looking forward to deposing your client under oath. See you in court. Because Wilder had made a critical mistake. By suing them, he'd opened himself up to legal discovery, which meant David's lawyers could subpoena every email, every financial record, every shred of evidence Wilder had thought was buried. John called it a gift. He just handed us the keys to his entire operation. Catherine was already filing counterclaims. Fraud. Conspiracy. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The list went on. But the real victory came 3 days later, when Interpol located Dr. Ruiz. He was living in Costa Rica under an assumed name, comfortable, wealthy, enjoying retirement funded by the families he'd destroyed. Until international warrants were issued for his arrest. The news broke during dinner. Gloria, David, and Debbie sat around David's kitchen table, eating takeout, a strange facsimile of normal family life, when David's phone buzzed. He read the message, then read it again, then looked up with an expression Gloria had never seen before. They found him. They're extraditing him back to the U.S. Debbie set down her fork. Dr. Ruiz? Dr. Ruiz. David's voice carried satisfaction so sharp it could cut. He'll face charges here. And every family he destroyed gets a chance at justice. Gloria's throat tightened. How many were there? At least 17. David's jaw clenched. 17 families over 8 years. Babies stolen. Mothers told their children died. Adoptive parents who thought they were saving orphans. 17 families. 17 mothers who'd grieved like Gloria. 17 children who'd grown up not knowing the truth. The magnitude of it was staggering. We're going to testify, Gloria said. Not a question, a statement. If you're willing. I'm willing, she looked at Debbie. We all are. Because this isn't just about us anymore. Debbie nodded slowly. Those other families deserve answers too. That night, after Debbie had gone to bed and the security team had done their final sweep, Gloria and David stood in his study, looking at the evidence John had compiled. Bank transfers, emails, medical records. The entire conspiracy laid out in black and white. Wilder's going to fight this, Gloria said. Let him fight. David's voice was cold. We have the truth. We have evidence. And we have 16 years of rage fueling us. Gloria looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion, the determination, the way he'd shifted his entire life in the past few weeks to prioritize Debbie's safety over everything he'd spent 16 years building. You stepped down from the board, she said quietly. 2 boards. I'll probably step down from more. David. I meant what I said. He met her eyes. Debbie is more important, you're more important, and I'm done choosing work over the people I love. The word love hung between them. Not past tense. Present. Gloria's chest tightened. We're not together. I know. But that doesn't change how I feel. He took a step closer. You don't have to feel the same way. You don't have to forgive me or want me back. But I need you to know I'm choosing differently this time. Choosing family. Choosing to be the man I should have been 16 years ago. Gloria wanted to say something. Wanted to acknowledge the shift she saw in him. But words felt insufficient. So instead, she reached out and took his hand. They stood there in his study, surrounded by evidence of the conspiracy that had destroyed their family, and held on to each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to driftwood. Outside, the media circus continued. Headlines proliferated. Social media debated. The world consumed their pain like entertainment. But inside this room, Gloria and David were united. Not as lovers, not even as friends yet. As warriors preparing for battle. And when the fight came, when Wilder and Ruiz and everyone who'd profited from their suffering had to answer for what they'd done, they would face it together. For Debbie. For the 16 families still searching for truth. For the life they'd been denied and the future they were determined to reclaim. The trial lasted 4 months. Dr. Ruiz pleaded guilty to 17 counts of fraud, falsifying medical records, and illegal adoption practices. He would spend the next 20 years in prison, a fraction of the lifetimes he'd stolen. But something. Wilder fought harder. His lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to suppress evidence, dismiss charges, delay proceedings. But discovery had been devastating. Emails planning the conspiracy, financial records showing payments. Testimony from hospital staff who'd been too afraid to speak before. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. Gloria had been there for the verdict. So had David. So had 9 other mothers whose babies had been stolen. Women who'd spent years grieving children who were alive, who'd been told lies by a man who saw families as profit margins. When the judge read the sentence, 15 years plus restitution, Gloria felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, not closure, but justice. The knowledge that the man who destroyed her family would answer for it. Debbie hadn't come to the trial. She was 17 now, older, quieter, carrying scars that would take years to heal. But she was healing. Therapy twice a week, tutors who actually cared, and 2 parents who were learning how to exist in the same space without the weight of 16 years crushing them. It had been a year since the fundraiser. A year since Gloria's world had shattered and rebuilt itself into something new. And tonight, Debbie's 17th birthday felt like the first real breath after drowning. David had asked Gloria to help plan it. She wants you there, he'd said. She specifically asked for you to be there. Those words had meant everything. The celebration was small. No catering service or event planners, or the kind of over-the-top party a billionaire could throw. Just the 3 of them in David's kitchen, making dinner together like a real family. Gloria chopped vegetables, while Debbie mixed cake batter, and David attempted to follow a recipe for homemade pasta. He was terrible at it. Flour dusted his expensive shirt. His first attempt at dough resembled cement. Debbie laughed a sound that still made Gloria's heart clench, and took over. Dad, you're a CEO. Delegate the pasta making to someone competent. I'm perfectly competent, David protested. You've built billion-dollar companies, but you can't roll dough, Gloria teased. Different skill sets. They fell into an easy rhythm. Music playing softly, conversation flowing naturally. Small moments that felt monumental because a year ago, they didn't exist. Debbie had changed. Not just physically, though. She'd grown taller, more confident in her skin, but fundamentally, she smiled more now. Laughed more. The haunted look that had lived in her eyes after the truth came out had faded into something softer. She'd started calling Gloria by her name instead of avoiding addressing her altogether. It wasn't mom, yet might never be, but it was connection, acknowledgement, a bridge being built one conversation at a time. Dinner was chaotic and imperfect. The pasta was slightly undercooked, the sauce too salty, the salad dressing too tangy. It was perfect. They ate at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room that screamed wealth and distance, but the small breakfast nook where real families gathered. They talked about Debbie's college applications, about Gloria's upcoming art show, about David's decision to start a foundation for families affected by adoption fraud. And for the first time in 17 years, Gloria felt like she belonged somewhere. After dinner, they moved to the living room for cake. Debbie had requested chocolate, her favorite since she was 6, David had mentioned. Gloria had stored that detail away like treasure, hoarding every small piece of information about the daughter she was still learning. The candles flickered as they sang. 17 tiny flames reflecting in Debbie's eyes. She closed her eyes, made a wish, blew them out in one breath. "What did you wish for?" Gloria asked. "Can't tell you. Won't come true." But David smiled like he already knew. They ate cake directly from the pan because Debbie said that's what they'd always done, a tradition from when she was small and David was raising her alone. Gloria watched them share this history she wasn't part of, and for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like a story she was being invited into. Later, Debbie opened her presents. From David, a camera she'd been wanting, professional grade for the photography classes she was taking. From Gloria, a sketchbook and a set of watercolors. She'd mixed herself colors she thought Debbie would love, based on the few times she'd seen her daughter paint. Debbie stared at the colors for a long moment. Then she looked up, with tears in her eyes. "You remembered. I mentioned I liked painting once. Just once." "I remember everything you tell me," Gloria said softly. Debbie set the gift aside and stood. She crossed to Gloria and hugged her, not the tentative, unsure embraces from before, but something solid, real. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trying, for being here, for not giving up on me, even when I didn't know how to let you in." Gloria held her daughter tighter. "I would have waited forever." When they pulled apart, Debbie turned to David. "Can we talk? All three of us?" Something in her tone made both parents straighten. They sat in the living room, Gloria and David on the couch, Debbie in the chair across from them. She looked nervous, determined, like she was about to say something that had been building for months. "I've been thinking," Debbie started, "about what we are, what we could be." She looked between them. "You're my parents, both of you, and I know everything that happened, the conspiracy, the separation, all of it. It broke something. But watching you these past few months," she trailed off, gathered courage, continued, "you're different together, not like you were before. I've seen the photos, heard the stories. You were young, and maybe not ready for forever. But now, you're friends, you laugh. You work together for me." Her voice steadied. "And I keep thinking about what we could have been, what we could still be." Gloria's heart hammered. David sat very still beside her. "I don't need you to get married again," Debbie said quickly. "I'm not asking for some fairy tale ending, but I am asking," she took a breath, "can we try being a family again? A real one? Whatever that looks like for us?" The question hung in the air. Gloria felt David's gaze shift to her, felt the weight of his silence, his hope, his willingness to let her decide. And Gloria realized, this was the moment, the choice she'd been circling for a year, the decision between safety and possibility. She could say no, could maintain the careful distance they'd established, could protect herself from the risk of being hurt again, or she could choose the messy, complicated, terrifying possibility of family. She looked at Debbie, this daughter who'd been stolen from her, who'd survived 16 years of a lie and come out the other side, still capable of hope. Then she looked at David, the man who'd broken her heart and spent a year proving he'd learned from it, who'd stepped down from boards and hired security and rearranged his entire life to prioritize the family he'd lost. "Yes," Gloria whispered. Then stronger, "Yes, we can try." Debbie's face crumpled with relief. She crossed to them, and suddenly they were all tangled together, arms around shoulders, tears mixing, the kind of embrace that felt like home. "I don't know what this looks like," Gloria said into Debbie's hair, "but I know, I want to figure it out, with both of you." They stayed like that for a long moment, a family built from ashes, holding each other like they could make up for lost time through sheer force of will. You know what? If this moment, right here, this family choosing to rebuild, if it touched something in you, share this story. Send it to someone who needs to know that broken things can be mended, that stolen time doesn't mean stolen futures, that families can be reborn from ashes. Share it, because hope multiplies when it's passed forward. Later, after Debbie had gone to bed, Gloria and David stood in the foyer. She should leave. Go back to her apartment. Maintain the boundaries. But David caught her hand. Stay, please. David, not like that. Just stay. Have coffee? Talk. His voice softened. I'm not ready for the night to end. So they ended up back in the kitchen, coffee cups in hand, talking about everything and nothing. About Debbie's college plans. About Gloria's decision to leave her apartment and find something closer, not in David's house, but nearby. Close enough to be present. I meant what I said earlier, David said suddenly. About the foundation. I want you involved. Your perspective, your experience, families need to hear from someone who survived this. I'm not sure I'm the right person to apply. You're exactly the right person. He set down his coffee cup. Gloria, you lost 16 years and you're still here. Still fighting. Still showing up for Debbie. That's not weakness. That's strength. These families need to see. The words settled over her like a blanket. Because maybe he was right. Maybe surviving was its own kind of victory. I'll think about it, she said. David nodded. Then, quietly, I have something for you. He left and returned with a small box. Inside was a key. To the house, he explained. So you don't have to knock. So Debbie knows you can come and go. So you know you belong here. Gloria stared at the key. Such a small thing. Such a monumental gesture. I can't promise I won't mess this up, David said. Can't promise I won't work too late or forget important things or revert to old patterns. But I can promise I'll try. That I'll choose you and Debbie over boardrooms. That I'll never stop fighting to keep this family together. Gloria looked up at him. Saw 16 years of regret and a year of change. Saw a man learning to be different, to be better. I can't promise I'll trust you immediately, she said. Can't promise the hurt will just disappear. But I can promise I'll try too. They stood there in the kitchen, holding promises that were fragile but real. And then, slowly, so slowly, Gloria could have stopped it if she wanted. David leaned in. The kiss was soft, hesitant, nothing like the passion of their youth, but something deeper, more earned. The kiss of two people who'd walked through fire and decided to try again anyway. When they pulled apart, Gloria's eyes were wet. Too fast, David whispered. No, she smiled. Just right. Listen, this story, Gloria's story, Debbie's story, the story of a family stolen and reclaimed. It's not just entertainment, it's a reminder that justice exists, that truth wins, that love, even broken love, can heal if you give it time and honesty. If that resonates with you, if you believe in second chances and families that refuse to stay broken, leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me about the family you've built or rebuilt. Because we're all in this together, fighting for the people we love, and your story matters too. Months later, Gloria would think about that night as the beginning. Not of romance exactly, that would take time, therapy, and countless conversations about what they wanted to build together, but of family. She moved into a house 3 blocks from David's. Close enough that Debbie could walk between homes, far enough that Gloria maintained independence. They had dinner together twice a week, slowly, carefully, rebuilding trust and connection. David kept his promise. He said no to deals that required too much travel. He attended Debbie's therapy sessions when invited. He showed up, and Gloria learned to let him. Learned that asking for help wasn't weakness. That family could look different than the fairy tale and still be whole. Debbie thrived. She got into her first choice college, started a blog for children of adoption fraud, became an advocate for others still searching for truth. She called Gloria Mom for the first time on a random Tuesday. No fanfare, no announcement, just, Mom, can you help me with this essay? Gloria had cried for an hour. Some nights, when Debbie was asleep and the house was quiet, Gloria would stand in her daughter's doorway and watch her breathe, would marvel at the fact that this girl, this incredible, strong, broken, healed girl, was hers, had always been hers, even when the world said otherwise, even when 16 years stretched between them, even when it seemed impossible that stolen things could be reclaimed. They'd been torn apart by greed and cruelty, but they'd found their way back through truth and stubborn love. A family built from ashes, broken and reforged, not perfect, not healed, Not whole in the way fairy tales promised, but whole in the way real families were. Messy and complicated and worth fighting for. Finally, impossibly, beautifully whole.